If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is Politically Speaking.
The 2023 Missouri legislative session enters its third week, and while bills have yet to be heard in committee in either chamber, that process will likely start this week. On this episode of Politically Speaking, House Assistant Minority Leader Richard Brown joins the show to talk about the expectations House Democrats have this upcoming session and what legislation he personally wants to cross the finish line. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
My promise to St. Louis was that I would do the absolute most for each and every person, starting with those who have the very least.
What I wanted to do was look and see what other states are doing.
We have to be willing to change those laws, that they are balanced and they affect everybody equally.
As somebody that grew up in the St. Louis area, in North St. Louis County, I didn't know any lawyers growing up.
We got to find long-term solutions to make government better, but also to be able to provide services to people.
I don't want to leave that federal money that we've been leaving all these years on the table.
We need to be spending this money to take care of Missourians.
I thought we accomplished a lot this year, but a lot more needs to be done.
And welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, State House and Politics reporter Sarah Kellogg. Joining me in St. Louis is St. Louis Public Radio's political correspondent,
Jason Rosenbaum.
And our guest today, joining us via Zoom, he is the Democratic representative for the 27th District in the Missouri House and the Assistant Minority Floor Leader,
Richard Brown.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Representative. Before we get started, I would love it if you told our listeners kind of who you are and why you decided to run for the House.
Sure, thank you. Well, again, my name is Richard Brown. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. Been a lifelong resident of Kansas City. I was born in Fort Riley, Kansas, on a military base there. And I've lived in Kansas City since I was about 6 months old. And ever since I was a little boy, it's been my dream to be a member of the Missouri House of Representatives. So for some kids, they grow up wanting to be in the NBA or play in the NFL. For me, I wanted to come here. Okay, that's always been my dream. And I served, while I was in graduate school, I served an internship here. And it was, again, my dream. I used to look at the pictures on the wall here of all the representatives that came before me. And finally, that day came. It really came about through my late wife, Regina Brown. Regina knew that I had always wanted to be state representative. But at the time, she was undergoing treatment for cancer. And she had asked me and inquired, when was I going to run for public office? And I told her, well, that wasn't on my radar. My concern was to get her better. And so she asked me to pray on it and ask God, what is it that he wants me to do? So I prayed on it. And a couple of weeks later, my wife asked me, well, what's your answer? And I told her, well, God's not telling me anything. So she told me, make it as clear as the nose on your face. Just ask the Lord, just make it as clear as the nose on your face. So I did. And I started praying, Lord, make it as clear as the nose on my face. What is it that you want me to do? And the next day when I went to work, I was working as a school teacher at the time. And I was the vice president of welfare for the Kansas City Federation of Teachers. I was reading through the old teacher contract. And in that contract, there was a clause that said the only way a teacher could break their contract with Kansas City Public Schools was if they were elected to the Missouri General Assembly. They didn't have to pay the $2,000 penalty. And I looked at that and I took it home to Regina and I showed her and she said, well, it don't get no clearer than that. So I went ahead and I filed. I had no money. I went up against a two-term incumbent. She too was a Democrat. And I won the election with 65% of the vote. And ever since then, no one has even filed to run against me. So I've been blessed. I'm now in my fourth and final term in the House. And I'm just grateful for the opportunity.
Yeah, your elections to the House are frankly not that interesting, except for your first one. Why did you decide to take on an incumbent legislator for this job? That's somewhat unusual, and it's even more unusual for that to actually be wildly successful like it was with you.
Well, there were people in that particular district that wanted to see a change. Folks in that district, they knew my reputation as a worker. I never worried about being the chief. I was always an Indian. And from my capabilities as a worker and the involvement that I had in the community, people trusted me. At the time, I was a neighborhood association president. I led that neighborhood through some of its tough times, and we got some really good things done in that neighborhood, such as tearing down an old school building and getting the city as well as the school district to maintain the property for us. That was huge in that neighborhood. So I really appreciate the people who trusted me by sending me to Jefferson City to represent them.
In addition to the fact that you have been elected to your House seat, I guess now 4 times, you've actually managed to make it into Democratic leadership. Why did you decide that that was the right thing to do for you?
Well, actually, I was approached to become the assistant minority leader. And again, I was very thankful that my colleagues thought of me in that manner. And when I was initially elected, I had no opposition. By acclamation, I ascended into the assistant minority leader role. And it has been challenging. But again, my colleagues have shown their support for me. They're trusting me by re-electing me for this session. So I'm very grateful again for that opportunity.
Moving to the 2023 legislative session, what are some expectations for House Democrats this year?
Well, there are 3 things that we're really working on. We're looking at trying to save lives. We are looking at trying to invest more into Missourians. It's not so much as investing in the state of Missouri, but we want to try to invest in Missourians. And that could be in the form of things like childcare. I know that's something we're going to talk about a little later, so I won't go too much into that right now. The third thing we want to do is we want to defend democracy. And that comes up with the ballot initiative process. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But those are the 3 things that we're trying to highlight in this session: is saving lives, defend democracy, and invest in Missourians.
And what issues could you see cooperation between House Republicans and Democrats? Some of those might be able to, can work together on some things.
Yeah. So when our new Speaker of the House, Dean Plocker, ascended and took the gavel at the dais, he did mention in his speech about childcare. And I think that that's something that both the House Democrats and House Republicans both agree on, that we need to try to help families in our state with that issue. It's just going to be a matter of how do we go about doing it.
And on an opposing side, where do you see maybe some sharp disagreements within the House?
Again, I haven't seen all the bills that have been filed. Really, it depends on the language that's being offered and what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I really would like to see us come together and find that common ground, because fighting each other does no one any good. Families out there, they're hurting right now, and they need a lot of help, and we need to try to give them the assistance they need.
So how do you think that House Democrats are going to be able to make their mark over policy over the next couple of years? You gained a few seats. You're still outnumbered. The House is still a majoritarian enterprise. What is a realistic prognosis for success over the next couple of years?
Well, we found on a few votes in the past that if we only had 3 or 4 more votes, we could have made a difference. Getting rid of the supermajority, I think, is helpful for the caucus. But again, it depends on what legislation that we're going to be looking at and coming up with over this next session. I'm very confident with having Dean Plocker as our speaker and John Patterson as the floor leader, that they want to get things accomplished and things done. And I've been able to work with both of them in the past. And we get along very well. So I think that you will see more cooperation between both sides of the aisle.
Let's dive into issues. During an episode of Politically Speaking last week, the aforementioned House Majority Leader John Patterson of Jackson County mentioned that tax cuts could be a major priority for the GOP. Here's a clip of what Majority Leader Patterson said on the show.
We have a huge surplus right now, and you wouldn't have to give all of that back in the form of tax cuts. But I do think if you're talking about an appetite, we do have an appetite for always seeing if we can reduce the tax burden on taxpayers, being mindful that things are not always going to be as rosy as they are, and that revenues are not always going to be as robust. And some of that the things that we've done in the past, like triggers, I think are worth looking at. But it doesn't just have to be in the form of income tax cuts. I think personal property is a huge issue, at least where I'm from in Jackson County, and I know it is for some of your listeners. I think we can look at reforming that.
We'll talk about personal property taxes later in the show, but what is going to be the House Democratic reaction if a tax cut push occurs this session?
Well, I think it depends on the aspect of the tax structure. The Republicans, they've been calling for completely eliminating personal property taxes, such as on vehicles. However, by doing so, it would significantly reduce the tax collections for local governments and school districts. Also, when you do something like that with personal property taxes on vehicles, what you're going to wind up doing instead is raising the registration cost on those vehicles to recoup the monies that are lost. So the reality is it really a tax cut that people are receiving?
Are there tax cuts that you think Democrats could support? If
Well,
so, what would those be, basically?
For working class folks, we wanted to reduce the income tax last year, and we didn't get that. Instead, the tax cut went to people in the state that were making well over $100,000 a year. We would be on board with trying to put more money into the pockets of working people. It only makes sense. The amount of money that we would have given back, it wasn't a significantly large amount of money, but it was enough where it could help folks. And that's what we're looking at, is how do we help families?
I know that one possible proposition would be maybe eliminating the sales tax on food, or maybe on feminine hygiene products. Is that something that Democrats would be in support of? I know that's a Republican filed bill over in the Senate.
Yeah. So the food tax is very popular, especially since they've done it over in Kansas. Of course, the cost of groceries continues to go up every day. My goodness, have you seen the cost of eggs lately? And so when you take that into account, well, eggs are expensive, so are all baked goods because they use eggs. Any kind of savings, I think, would help families. And that was something that I'm on board with. The feminine product, that's something that's been popular across the country. And we took a look at that. Unfortunately, we didn't get it passed last year. I'm sure it's going to come up again this session. I would like to do something in that area if it will help families. And again, a lot of people say, well, it's specific to women. Well, again, this is something that's needed. So I want to make sure that we get those cuts to the folks that need them, and on some of these products that, such as food and the feminine products that people use on an everyday basis.
Do you think it's something of a missed opportunity that we have billions of dollars in reserve and we're not doing anything to help localities to pay for violent crime reduction efforts or to aid schools? Or it seems like that could be an area of agreement of creating a fund where, cities and counties would come to the state, say we have this project, and then it would then be allocated to them. Is that something you think that could happen in the next year or two?
There's a lot of projects that we need to take a look at around the state. You mentioned the issue of dealing with violence. I would like to see some more money going into programs like mental health. We know that the young man that went in and shot the kids in St. Louis at the school, he was suffering from some mental health issues. If the money and the programs were available, would they have stopped that particular incident? I don't know, but I will say that for people who do need help, we want to make sure that it's available for them. So I would like to see money go into programs like that. I consider myself a fiscal conservative. I don't really like labels, but I'm not the man, nor am I the man behind the man, but I am the man that watches the money. And I would like to see, us put that money more into our infrastructure, We always talk about broadband, but listen, there's a lot of roads out in the rural areas that really need to be paved or need to be replaced as far as bridges. I've talked to folks around the state in our rural areas that really want to see road improvement. So I'd like to see more money put into that. I think we have to be very careful with how we use this money because this is a one-time deal. We have one chance to get this right, and I would rather see us get it right rather than to go out and just spend a lot of money. And we didn't do the things that were very beneficial to the state.
Another thing that House Speaker Dean Plocher pointed to as a priority was making it more difficult to amend Missouri's constitution. Here's a clip from his opening day press conference.
And I think much of the constitutional initiative petition is abused by out-of-state money interests where people have no economic tie to the state of Missouri, or they don't live here, their families aren't here. And I think the Missouri voter needs to have more transparency about what is being brought to them when they vote for it in the Constitution. And if you look at just to attack it on this one, the last one that was just passed had 40 pages that we added to our Constitution. I think that's language that most people don't understand. It's hard to enumerate what 40 pages would look like in the Constitution and the finite amount of words that you get to put before the voters. So I too support constitutional initiative petition reform. I want the voters to be less influenced by deep pocket out-of-state interests and more informed about what they're voting for.
What do House Democrats think about this issue?
Well, it seems that the Republican politicians seem to think that they know better than the people of Missouri. I think it's demeaning to our citizens, and it illustrates to the point that Republican politicians don't trust the people to vote the way that the GOP wants them to vote. I believe that if we made change to that initiative petition, that under these resolutions, special interests will only get more powerful. The Republicans argued that special interests have too much say in Missouri's current initiative process, but these changes will only make it so that organizations and groups with money and resources can even hope to make changes to the process. Now, keep in mind that through this process, folks in Missouri were able to get Medicaid expansion. We got a ban on right to work. We got the medical marijuana and recreational marijuana legalization in the state. And I do want to forewarn the Republicans that one day they're going to be in the minority. And the only way to pass conservative policy will be through the initiative petition. So if they kill it, they're going to regret it.
But isn't it objectively true that interest groups have spent millions of dollars to try to pass something through constitutional amendments as a way to get around the legislature? The speaker was talking about the marijuana initiative that passed in 2022, which even members of your own party has said is a sweetheart deal for people that are existing license holders. So
right.
Isn't what he's saying like undeniably true?
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but what I would say is that people wanted recreational marijuana in Missouri. I feel that the bill that was brought forth last year by Ron Hicks was actually a better piece of legislation than what the people voted on, but we could not get that bill out of the House and onto the Senate. And so because the people of Missouri want the legalization for recreational marijuana, they took matters into their own hand, they voted, and they have spoken.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
And we're back on Politically Speaking. I'm your host, St. Louis Public Radio's State House and Politics reporter, Sarah Kellogg. Joining me is my co-host, Jason Rosenbaum, who is the political correspondent for St. Louis Public Radio. And our guest today is Democratic Representative Richard Brown, who represents the 27th House District, which includes part of Jackson County, Kansas City specifically. Let's get back into it. We have a lot more questions for you. The first one is a policy area that I think Democrats, it seems to have even a larger interest this year due to tragic circumstances, is gun gun control. You know, you yourself have filed a few bills related to firearms. What bills related to gun control do you think even have a chance of advancing in a while you guys are the super minority?
Well, I don't have the specific bill number on it, but Blair's Law, we have been trying to get passed for a number of years. The bill was originally carried by past Representative Duran McGee, and once he left the House, Mark Sharp picked it up and has been carrying it. It's been attached on other bills in the past, but it didn't make it out of the Senate. I think that that's the one gun bill that we really have a shot at getting passed this year. I have two bills that I have filed in the past. This year's House Bill 32, which prohibits persons who have been convicted of domestic abuse from owning a firearm in the state of Missouri. Now, to me, this is common sense legislation because it only mirrors federal law. I really don't see any loss in this, but again, there's a lot of people that support the Second Amendment, or they say they are supporters of the Second Amendment, and they're going to vote against anything that seems to take away guns from someone. So, realistically, I don't think that that will pass, but again, it's there. We have an opportunity to send a message to people in the state of Missouri that says that we do want to try to do something to curb gun violence. My other House bill, number 33, in this one, I would like to repeal the law that prohibits local municipalities from enacting their own gun laws. I was originally approached by then Mayor Lyda Crewson of St. Louis, as well as current Mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, for this piece of legislation. And basically, by repealing this, it would allow municipalities like St. Louis City or Kansas City to say, hey, when it comes to a concealed weapon, right now anybody can carry a concealed weapon without a CCW in our state. Well, what's wrong with saying that in the city limits of Kansas City or St. Louis, you have to be 21 and have a CCW in order to have a concealed weapon? I think that that's responsible. So I hope that, if we're going to be realistic about doing something to help reduce gun violence in our state, we have to look at the needs of our cities, because the needs of our cities are much different than in rural Missouri. When you start looking at Kansas City, St. Louis, but also include Springfield and Columbia, they're seeing upticks in violence as well.
Governor Mike Parson announced this week his plan to increase state worker pay with an 8.7% cost of living adjustment, as well as an additional $2 an hour for some workers who are on late night or overnight shifts in some departments. What are your thoughts on this plan? Does it go far enough?
Well, I applaud the governor for trying to increase the pay of our state workers. Our state workers have consistently been at the bottom. I think it's a good start. Again, we've got that $6 billion that's sitting in reserve. What can we do with that money? But again, we have to keep in mind that money is one time. These pay increases are permanent. So how do we pay for that as we move forward? Okay. We definitely want to keep good people working for the state. We've had a hard time keeping corrections officers in particular because their pay is so low. I've heard stories where a warehouse will come to a community where there is a correctional facility, and they lose a lot of their guards because they can make more money working in the warehouse.
Another area of likely agreement between parties is on childcare. You mentioned childcare. I'm asking about childcare. What policies do you want to see specifically passed to address this?
Well, I would like to see us increase the reimbursement rate that we give to a lot of the childcare centers. I had an opportunity when we were out of session to go visit a couple of childcare providers in my district, and that was one of the problems that they're facing. Childcare providers have had to close because they just can't afford to pay their workers. For families, I'd like to see a tax credit. It's been many years since I've had to raise a small child, but I do remember how difficult it was for my wife and I to find someone that we could afford. And so I know that hasn't changed for a lot of folks, especially when it comes to infants. The cost of caring for an infant is extraordinarily expensive. I can't imagine being young and trying to start again today. When I look at the cost of rent, wow, I'm seeing rent for one-bedroom apartment as high as $1,700 a month. And we're not even talking about an exclusive neighborhood or anything. We're talking about right in the city. And I can't believe how high rent has gotten. I'm just thankful that I was fortunate enough to become a homeowner, purchase a home. And then you combine that with the cost of childcare. Wow, that's taken a huge chunk out of folks' earnings every week.
So let's talk about education, because I think that's your former vocation before you became a state legislator. What education legislation would you like to see passed this session?
Well, right now there's been a lot of concern when it comes to open enrollment in the state. I have concerns about open enrollment because in some of the school districts that I represent, I've got 3 school districts: Kansas City, Missouri, Raytown, and the Center School District. My concern is with open enrollment, perhaps one of my smaller school districts, such as Center School District or the Hickman Mills School District that I formerly represented prior to redistricting, there's a possibility they could lose students. And what happens to those small districts like that? Even Kansas City right now is fighting for students, to retain students and to recruit more students. As the people in Kansas City are aware, there was a plan to close 10 schools in Kansas City. The school district announced last night that they're going to keep 8 of those schools that were slated for closure open. They're only going to close 2, under the condition that we can raise enrollment in those buildings, but also that we can pass a tax levy in Kansas City. But I don't think we've passed one since, I believe, 1962. That's a long time. So there's a lot of work to be done.
So what legislation do you expect to see from the Republican supermajority on education?
Well, again, I think that we're going to see primarily, the open enrollment and charter school bills. I don't know where they may go this year. Open enrollment, it had some traction last year. I don't really know where that's going to be headed. So I'm keeping an eye on it, trying to keep my finger on the pulse. Because right now, for me personally, my concern is teacher pay. I'm concerned about the 4-day school week that many districts are starting to go to. One, because they see it as a cost saver, but also they see it as a recruitment and retention tool for teachers.
Yeah, that was going to be my next.
Get teachers out there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That was actually going to be my next question. Like, if you had seen that there was a school district that was only telling you had to teach 4 days a week, would you be incentivized and enticed to go teach at that school district?
Yeah, it's very attractive. People are trying to figure out what to do with, their free time. People enjoy having the weekend or an extended weekend. Here in the Capitol, many of our legislative assistants only work Monday through Thursday. I know mine does, because they enjoy having that longer weekend off. So I think that will incentivize people to want to work in that district, teach in that district, as well as the other incentives that come with being a teacher, such as a pension. When you're young, you don't think about retirement income, but it's so important as you get older.
So from that, the response to that question, it doesn't really seem like a 4-day school week you don't think it's a terrible idea as far as like teacher recruitment and retention. But I think that for parents like myself, if my district went to 4 days, my reaction was, how am I going to be able to make this work if the school district is not offering some sort of childcare like option while me and my wife have to work outside of our home? Like, I'm sure that's been a reaction of a lot of parents if the school district doesn't actually physically have the child on the 5th day. Like, what's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, that's kind of the concern, but we're also seeing more and more parents working from home, and we're also seeing corporate America going to 4-day work weeks. So I think there has to be more of a cooperation between the education industry as well as employers out there to try to make this thing work. I've always been a believer in the 5 days school week. for the simple fact, as you pointed out, parents work. And they do rely on schools to provide some type of childcare for them. Although I always like to say that school isn't there for childcare, we're there to educate children.
Right. Absolutely. And I do agree with that. Um, I I guess I'm taking this from also a different perspective because I have two kids with IEPs, and I would probably want my kids in school and getting not only general education services, but also special education services 5 days rather than 4, especially if it's a developmental disability like one of my sons have. So again, I get that there's pros and cons to this argument, but it seems like for parents, like it's overwhelmingly con for a lot of reasons.
I see where you're going with that. Let me
Yeah,
answer
but yeah, I want you to address that point, actually.
So I understand where you're coming from, Jason, because I too was a parent of a child with cerebral palsy. And, I understand the services that the school district offers for parents. And a lot of people tend to forget all the different services that are provided by schools aside from just your basic education. We need to keep that in mind as legislators as we move forward, because as I tell people, there's no one size fits all. Every district has different students with different needs, and they know what's best for their kids. We have to figure out how to best to provide for those districts.
So you mentioned personal property tax earlier. There has been talk from some Republicans about trying to eliminate it completely. House Majority Leader Patterson talked about maybe assessing like a car over 3 years instead of 1, because regardless of, I agree with you, like getting rid of it would be pretty detrimental to a lot of different jurisdictions. But it's also true that personal property tax this year was astronomically high, especially for people with used cars like me. So is there possibly like a middle ground that could provide some people with relief going forward without maybe just completely eliminating it?
Yeah, I received a letter from the assessor in Jackson County earlier this week, and it concerned one of my constituents that I actually know. I'm familiar with her home. The assessment valuation had not changed from last year. However, she saw a $1,200 increase in her property taxes, and I was blown away by that when I saw that. And so I'd like for us to be able to figure out a way how we can either A, cap the property tax rate, B, is there a way to maybe for our senior citizens to get them grandfathered in? I'm not a tax person, so I'd like to rely on those persons and those individuals who have an expertise in that area to give us some guidance on how to go about that, because I believe that there is a way that will be beneficial not only to the homeowner, but to the county as well as the state when we collect those property taxes, so that folks aren't losing their homes. People are able to get tags on their car. It seems in Missouri, temporary tags are permanent. Okay, it's not unusual to go down the street to find a car with a temporary plate on it, and it expired 6 months ago.
I think there are some areas with House Democrats where there's just not going to be an area of compromise, that Republicans are going to bring up an issue and there's no support, I think, in any situation from House Democrats. I think one of those issues, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is bills that bar transgender girls from playing girls' sports. How do you feel that Democrats will respond if those bills come up for a vote again?
Yeah, I wish those kind of bills quit coming up. They're so discriminatory. We're in 2023 now. Haven't you learned? Leave people alone. We're talking about kids here, and that's the way I feel about this type of bill. That you're bullying some kids. I don't know what it's like to have a child that's transitioning, but I think for those families that can be difficult, and their kids are facing a very difficult time in their life. We want to do what's best for children. I don't think that that's someplace that the legislature should be involved with, especially when we're talking about sports. We have sports bodies, Missouri State High School Athletic Association. Let them govern that. Let the NCAA come up with their ruling. These are the folks that know about athletics. Sometimes I think that we as a legislature, we are detrimental to education in our own state.
I'm sure when this bill comes up, because it will come up, I'm pretty confident of that, they're going to say, this is what our constituents want. And we've had an overwhelming communication from people in our districts that we don't want transgender girls playing girls' sports. What's going to be your response to that?
Well, how many transgender girls do you know? I mean, the number is probably so small. And why are you spending so much time concentrating on just the small group of kids? I mean, to me, that's hate. Again, let those bodies that govern sports, let them make the determination and the decision. I think that you're climbing a slippery slope when you bring that to the legislature, because it's borderline hate. And I just see it as hate.
Yeah, to build up on that, I think it was a report from the Missouri Independent that said there are more bills filed banning girls from participating in sports that align with their gender identity than there are trans girls in Missouri. So do you find this as time that should be spent in the legislature? You only have so much time. Is this something that you think is worth that time?
Well, it's worth the time to protect anyone's rights. Okay. And that's what we do as Democrats. We stand up for people. We protect your rights. I wish that folks would quit attacking those people, attacking those children. Before they used to bring up the bathroom bill, and I used to point out to folks, you've been going to the bathroom with these people all along. You just didn't know it. Okay. And when we do things like this, we also shoot ourselves in the foot. We know that when they passed the bathroom bill years ago in North Carolina, I believe it was the NBA All-Star game that they lost. Years ago, Arizona, they didn't want to recognize the King holiday, so they lost the Super Bowl. Okay, now let's take a look at what's going on in Kansas City. We get a lot of NCAA events in Kansas City as well as St. Louis. Okay, do you really want to lose a NCAA Final Four because of some pending legislation like that? No. Okay, we really need to look at what we're doing. How do you attract employers to this state who maybe don't have those type of viewpoints? They're just looking at the talent that people have. They want to recruit those folks. How do you get those employers to come to the state when they know that this environment exists?
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Representative Brown, for joining us on the show. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is a part of the University of Missouri St. Louis. You can follow all of our work at stlpr.org. And Representative Brown, where can people find you on the internet where you want to be found?
Well, you can find me on Facebook. Just look for State Representative Richard Brown. I'm there. And of course, you can always find me here at the state capitol. It seems like I'm always in the building somewhere.
All right. Thank you so much. And until next time, so long.